This podcast is brought to you by the Albany Public Library main branch and the generosity of listeners like you. What is a podcast? God, Daddy, these people talk as much as you do. Razib Khan's Unsupervised Learning.
Thanks for listening to the ungated version of the Unsupervised Learning podcast. If you want to read some essays on some of these topics, please check out razib.substack.com. Again, that's razib.substack.com. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. I am here with the Unsupervised Learning podcast. You know, I need to get better about just like the introduction, because it's always like, you know, but I don't have a radio voice. I don't have a radio like delivery. I don't think I have a face for radio, though. I've been told, to get into that, but it depends on who you're talking. It depends on who you're talking to. Yeah. So I'm here with Ethan Strauss. Some of you know Ethan from House of Strauss, his Substack. I mean, that's the main place that you will see him now. You know, he worked for The Athletic. You know, he wrote a book on the Golden State Warriors. He is a well-known sports journalist. I like to say that he is a cultural commentator now, which I think he is. I don't know if we're going to get into too much of that today, but you know, Ethan is. You know, I've been on his podcast a couple of times, and his listeners think I'm arrogant and kind of a dick. The issue is Ethan and I are bros. We're actually friends. We see each other regularly when I go to the Bay Area, and it's just like we hang out a lot. So, you know, I just kind of forget sometimes that people might not understand the context. And so when I'm telling him that he's retarded and he doesn't know what he's talking about, you know, you guys might take it a little different way, but that's just the way I talk to him. That's the way we talk, you know. We just kind of like rib each other and make fun of each other. So I'll try to be a little bit more professional here, because I do realize now, you know, there's people listening, you know, and you know, who want to know about sports. My listeners, I think, like, kind of more of a nerdy crowd. They don't know that much about sports, but, you know, sports is a big part of our culture. It's symbolic, it's representative, it can be ahead of the curve. I mean, you know, I'm thinking particularly about racial relations and other stuff, just because the demographics in the United States, sports is really important. You know, and for, you know, certain regions of the country, I feel certain sports are very important to their identity. Football in the South, probably basketball in places like Indiana, you know, maybe more in the Midwest. And then baseball, I would say it's more of an East Coast, West Coast thing. I don't know. It's not as big in the South. There are obviously Southern baseball teams, but
I'll interject real quick. I think the capital of basketball is Los Angeles. I think that's where you'll see
that's fair.
The most talent and also the fervent love of the Lakers. And many people try to brand New York as the mecca of basketball, but they, for whatever reason, stopped producing talent. There might be the passion there, but there's not the talent there. But I'm sorry, it's your podcast. You take the reins.
No. Well, I mean, the thing with basketball in SoCal, and you're from SoCal, you're from San Diego, a little further south, is you can play it outdoors all year long. You don't need facilities. I wonder if that's part of it. I know that's part of it with the football. Like they have all year football in SoCal, and you know, you can just like play it all the time in the South as well.
Yeah, I think the all year round aspect that's probably a factor in why LA has been talent rich, but at the same time, Chicago and the DC DMV area have been talent rich. Now, there are these odd environmental impacts with basketball. Basketball, in the popular conception, is the sport where people make it from the inner city, hard scrabble, and they make it to the big time. And it was like that, Razib, when we were kids. But the NBA has undergone this, somebody called it a Grant Hillification, named after the very personable, palatable former Duke star Grant Hill, of suburban kids, upper middle class kids. And I think what's difficult for a lot of people to really get is that the league is disproportionately Black, but also disproportionately upper middle class. So it is roughly, maybe a little bit less as Black as it was when we were kids. But many of these kids are the kids of NBA players, and many of them grew up in wealthy backgrounds. And not to just fit too much theory into all of this, I think part of that is because rule changes emphasized shooting, and shooting the ball became more important shooting pointers became more important. And like playing the violin or the piano or any of these skills of refinement, it helps to have resources. It helps to have a gym. It helps to have all of these things in addition to these other factors, such as genetics being huge and height being the biggest selection pressure. And that's why so many of the players are sons of former players. I'm rambling, but yes, I'm riffing. I get insecure. You started this podcast off insecure. I'm insecure. There are podcasts I can do, local sports radio, where I can just easy breezy just talk. I know how smart your listeners are, Razib. It haunts me a little bit. I feel like I've got to rise to the level.
No. So you might not be. Okay, so one thing I will say, like this is kind of like a diss, so I'm gonna do it, like keeping it. You might not have the fastest CPU compared to some of my listeners, but you have a lot of applications installed. So I think there's a lot of information in your head that
Is
I'm
that
trying to download here.
is that a shape rotator way of saying jack of all trades, master of none? Is that what you're trying to
No,
convey?
you have domain expertise, right? Like, so
No.
sometimes, like, I will like ask about something really casually because I don't know much about. Well, I don't know much about sports. And you'll like
Yeah,
go
you don't know
off.
what to call it or how to
Yeah,
pronounce
like
it. Yes,
yeah, it's been a while, but well, I was telling you, I think before, they know, like, I haven't been watching sports. I haven't been following sports really for like 20 years. Partly just when I you know, personal reasons. I stopped watching, in my mid-20s, I stopped paying attention to sports. So, like, I watched a lot of NFL films. So not about, I know about the Super Bowl in the 70s with the Iron Curtain and, and all the Steelers and all that stuff. But I want to ask about the international aspect because, we're going to talk about later this Slovenian slash Serbian Slovenian basketball player from Dallas who got traded to LA. And so I was like, what's going on with that? Like, what's going on with the international players? There was an article that I read. It talked about, like, LeBron, who's the elder millennial now. He's near the end of his career. And then you have the guy at Golden State, Steph Curry, and then you got Kevin Durant. So those are kind of like the triumvirate of like the millennials. These are Black Americans, but a lot of the up and comers are from other parts of the world. Now, even when I was like paying attention, there were a lot of there's Drazen Petrovic, there was Vlade Divac, there was a lot of Yugoslavians already. There were Lithuanians like Šarūnas Maršalonis, and other internationals like some Germans, obviously like Dirk Nowitzki of late. Whatever. There's a lot of Europeans, and then there was like a little bit of the Chinese. There were a few Chinese, not too many though, for how many people are in China.
That's a whole other topic right there. I'll note that Drazen Petrovic and Divac used to be quite close, but when the Yugoslavian nation broke apart, they couldn't really hang out anymore, and it's something that haunted Divac ever since because Petrovic died tragically in a car crash, I believe. And he was Croatian and Divac was a Serb. So very tragic. Yugoslavia had this amazing team. And now you're seeing so much talent from that region. But obviously it's compartmentalized in all these little Balkan countries.
Yeah. And so the Balkan countries are big. And like, I think there's some Turks. It's the stylized fact that I remember is like basketball is actually more popular in Southern Europe than Northern Europe, but obviously, Germans and Scandinavians and Dutch are taller, so they should have talent in that way. So you have these Europeans coming in. In baseball, you traditionally have a lot of people from Latinx America. A lot of Dominicans, really a lot of Dominicans. It's not like that many Mexicans, mostly Dominicans, and I think this is just. I don't know if we talked about it. I think we talked about it, but I mean, Fernando Valenzuela, the fat pitcher, was like the big Mexican, but there aren't that many Mexican baseball players because indigenous Mexican people have short legs, long torsos. Their build is not as good. I mean, it makes sense that Valenzuela was like a fat pitcher, like he didn't need to be athletic. Whereas Dominicans are mixed race, African, and Spanish with some little bit of Taino. But they're basically
But
very similar.
Was the term you used with Coleman Hughes genetically complex? That was a term that Coleman liked when you praised him. Coleman of Puerto Rico.
Oh yeah. Well, because he's Puerto Rican, African American. Yeah. So you got all these like patterns that you see in the different leagues. One thing I have to ask, like my impression, and again, I don't pay much attention to it. Uh, Football, American football, which is a very American sport. Of the three, it's the most American sport. There's very few international players in American football
Very few. Sometimes punters get in there because they come
because
over
they're
with
soccer
the
players.
the Aussie rules experience, and there's
Yeah.
utility to that. Every now and again, they'll get somebody from some strange country that plays some strange sport that they think will apply to football. And there are Samoans in the NFL that's been
Well,
part
there's
of the league for a while.
American Samoa is part of America,
Yeah,
right? So I don't know.
yeah. It's like, how do you count that? Yeah, I'm not sure. But yes, it's a very American sport, which we're going to get into the cultural stuff potentially, but I think that's partially the secret of its success that the elites, or whatever term we're using these days, don't want to admit. I think part of what we've seen in this era is that the very American sports with American players resonate with American audiences. And the dream of globalizing the sports in order to capture more revenue abroad, that part might have been successful, but there's a cost to it. Americans, we might not be the most patriotic people in the world. We're a multicultural people. We might not have the strongest abasia or whatever that term is, but for the most part, people want to watch those geriatric millennial superstar NBA players you name. And some of the new guys coming in from these other places, it's not their fault. They're great, but the American audience not as captivated.
Yeah. Okay. So this makes me think of movies.
Mm.
Movies have gotten candidly dumber because they have to be simpler because certain types of cultural tropes do not exist across societies. You just have to have a very simple story for it to like work in Europe, the US, China, Japan, possibly some
Yeah.
third world countries like in India.
It's like what kind of nuanced comedy is gonna be hilarious to somebody from China with no American cultural experience? Yeah, no, it has had this homogenizing effect on content and on art that people don't quite know how to discuss, because it seems like it's getting into this dangerous xenophobic territory, but it's just the case. Yeah, you can make something fit and go really deep with it, but if you're trying to broaden it out, it's not gonna go that way.
Yeah, and so um I mean, basketball, moderately international. Baseball's been pretty international for a while, though. I mean, like Roberto Clemente and stuff like that. It's been like going on for a long time. Um, how do you think that that has affected? I mean, so basketball. I know there were some rule changes, but it's much more of a uh, outside in game than
Yeah.
inside out, like it was back when I was actually paying attention. I mean, I think it transitioned like near the end of when I was paying attention, but really, like the Bad Boys, the Detroit Bad Boys of the 1990s, or like the late 80s, early 90s could not be a thing. Like they would just basically be called on fouls constantly today. And so basketball become more of a shooting game, more of a skill game. You bring these international guys, a lot of them traditionally were, really, really skilled outside player, outside shooters, or they were like super tall blockers or something like that. Not super skilled. But in any case, it's changed that way with baseball. I actually have not kept track of baseball at all. We are now past the juicing era, and so like, what's going on in baseball? And I know that I think some of the international players from Latin America, like the Dominicans, they brought in like a little bit more speed, a little more base stealing into the game in the 20th century. I don't know what's going on now in baseball. Honestly, I've always felt like baseball has like an older demographic, and like even like 20 years ago, I thought like, I mean, sports gonna be around, but I thought that it probably had like the worst prospects. It's also not Latin America's fine, but like they're not like rich countries,
Mm.
So aside from Japan, I don't think baseball is super popular anywhere in the developed world, is it?
So I think you said a lot there. This could be taken in a variety of directions, and we even just skip past this whole concept of how
Oh,
certain
wait. I forgot about Canada. I think baseball's kind of in Canada. I forgot
it is kind of in Canada. It is sort of in Canada, but we even skip past this whole interesting idea of how the simpler sports can just scale easily and be international. One of the things keeping American football American is that it's utterly inscrutable. It's like the language acquisition phase to not get that when you're growing up. And I remember when I was in Israel and I tried to explain it to an Israeli, and I just realized, oh my God, I actually have a nation. I am American. That all
Wait,
of
wait,
this
wait.
makes sense to me.
Is it like, because like I can't understand cricket. I don't know what the hell's
Yeah.
going on. Is it like cricket
Yeah.
for them?
Yes. Yeah. You start doing it from scratch. Some of your listeners are probably from far-flung nations. I don't know how much
Yeah,
contact.
about 40% of my listeners are not American.
Yeah, you go, okay, so it's called football. It's mostly played with your hands. You start by kicking the ball to one team. Then you need to try to get the ball. You have 4 tries to get it past 10 yards. But if you're penalized, you go in retreat. And on the fourth try, if you haven't made it, you can either go for it again to get the 10 yards. But a lot of teams in that situation, they kind of between their legs, they hurl it backwards and then they punt it. They kick it to the other team to start over on their end of things. You start explaining it and the aspects of it, and it's exceedingly complicated. It's almost like the English language itself, where it doesn't make a lot of intuitive sense. It's not optimized for that. It's optimized for having this richness and this diversity of options, but that doesn't mean it's optimized for being readily understood all over the world,
Yeah.
like soccer is. Everybody gets soccer. Soccer just makes immediate sense to anybody who sees it.
Yeah. There's all these like, rules and all these different things you can do. Also, I have to say, I think one of the issues with American football is there's 22 players on the team on the field, and they're all playing at the same time. Whereas like with
Yeah.
basketball, it's 5-on-5, so that's 10. 10 versus 22, like I think it's a lot easier for people to keep track of. The reality is with American football, even if you've been watching American football your whole life, there's a reason they have to do replay, because you're not going to be watching the whole field. You're going to be looking at certain things and you might miss something. And you're like, oh, what happened? The ball's over there, you know?
Yeah, there's this great book called Collisions Low Crossers by this New Yorker writer, Dawidoff, who embedded with the colorful coach Rex Ryan. And it was back when he coached the New York Jets. And he said something like, is there anything Americans are more obsessed with and know less about than pro football? And that book was written over 10 years ago. I think we might have an answer to that question. It might be politics. More people vote than watch the Super Bowl. But it's, I think, a really insightful question. People don't tend to actually know what they're watching. They don't know much about how the game operates. The way NFL football is conveyed to the masses, they follow the flight of the ball when the quarterback throws it. So you don't even see half the things that are happening. It is the most base level thing the regular beer drinking American knows about. And it's also completely esoteric. And it's got both qualities. But I mean, I do want to return to some of your questions about the popularity of sports internationally. I think baseball is more internationally popular than it's given credit for. The NBA really self-branded as international. They were ambitious about it. The commissioner, David Stern, in the 1990s went to China with this goal to conquer China, this imperialistic, this colonial quest to conquer China. And he wasn't shy about it. He liked telling that story. Baseball, they wanted the globalization, but they never really marketed it. And I think they are arguably as global as the NBA. You mentioned Japan, the best baseball player in the world, or at least the most talented, the one most obsessed about, is Shohei Ohtani from Japan, who's a great pitcher and a great batter, good looking guy, a lot of charisma, got into a gambling scandal, might have been his translator, a lot going on, plays for the Dodgers. You know, Japan might not be the biggest country in the world, but it's not nothing. Korea loves baseball as well. And you've got the variety of Latin American nations. So baseball's international, and it's this funny divergence between cultural cachet and popularity measured, because the last few World Series have been more watched than the last few NBA finals. But that doesn't tend to be the narrative. And I think part of that is just because the NBA is more of a glamorous sport to people than baseball is. Baseball's got this narrative of perpetual decline and that it's going to die and it's boring they've made all these reforms and changes to try to quicken it up and try to get in good with the kids. Basketball is more of a narrative of it's cool, rappers like it. But I think in a way they're just facing the same problem. They're facing the same issue, which is that we're in a world of noise. There's so much to watch. You go on YouTube, you can watch anything you want to watch. And sports that have a lot of games, as baseball does, as basketball does, as hockey does, it gets lost in the shuffle. We're in an event world and they are inventory sports. The events like football, you've got predictable, rare events. MMA, you've got predictable, rare events. Those, I think, are more able to maintain their purchase in the culture. These other sports where there's this constant flow of what their output is, I think, at least in terms of cultural relevance, they're getting paid a lot, but in terms of cultural relevance, I think they're all facing the same problem.
Yeah, I think what you're alluding to here is the attention economy, and I had never thought about that. I know that movie executives have started to worry that Zoomers are born in like 97 and later, usually, sometimes 95, but really usually 97 and later, and they don't like to sit for 90 minutes. Obviously,
Yeah.
watching a sporting event is going to be longer than 90 minutes, first of all. And second of all, this is something you have to probably, to get the maximal impact out of it, watch over a season, which is a
Yeah.
lot of basketball games, you're not going to watch all the basketball games, and most people are not going to watch all the baseball games. But still, football is like 16, that's doable. Or is it 17 now? I don't remember. The regular season.
But it's okay.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah,
jumping into correct. It's close enough. Yes.
Yeah, it's close enough. It was changed, but my point here is, so you have this generational aspect with the attention economy, and they're trying to figure that out. You just said baseball changed its rules. Like, how did it change its rules? Can you tell me? Like, I kind of know a little bit, but honestly, I think a lot of it's happened in the last 20 years that I haven't been paying attention.
Yeah, they, among other things, made the bases bigger to encourage more base stealing. They want more action on the base paths. There's this. I mean, all the sports are also afflicted with this other broader problem, which is refinement culture, optimization culture, whatever you want to call it. Baseball, when they applied this rigorous analysis to what works, it resulted in teams making choices that weren't aesthetically appealing. And so the teams discovered that home runs are just oddly undervalued, and having a nice level swing that makes contact reliably. Yeah, that's great for the fans. Fans like to see action. They like seeing the ball get hit. But what's better is to have an upward trajectory, because you're just trying to knock it out the yard. And so what ends up happening when you're doing that, and it's combined with teams trying to get pitchers that have more velocity, because that matters even more than was maybe realized. You just have a situation where it's strikeout or home run, strikeout or home run, strikeout or home run, and all this dead space. So baseball has been trying to almost adjust to the nerds figuring out how to game the system. The nerds figured out how to do all these wild shifts where all the infielders would position themselves exactly where the hitter would hit the ball. And so the guy would hit the ball 110 miles an hour, and it just goes right into a dude's glove. And people argued that should continue, but baseball said, no, we're an entertainment business. This is supposed to be fun. Nobody likes watching this. And so they banned the shift. That was one of the rule changes they made. They have a pitch clock now because they worry about it taking too long. Baseball is just very much haunted by this fear that they're going to fade into irrelevance because the young people can't sit through it, as we're talking about. And once their older fans die off, that's it. And so credit to them. I don't know if any of this will work. I think the inventory problem is insurmountable, but it's better to try than to do nothing. And so baseball has opted to try.
And then you have basketball tried to be international really hard, and it's got some problems. I mean, the issue with China is it just never got any Chinese players to the magnitude that it really wanted to, right? And so
Yeah.
it's not really big without.
I want to talk about that. We'll talk about the basketball. I just want to do one aside when it comes to these sports and this general problem of I'm going to call it the youth cliff. There was a survey that Generation Alpha that only 15% reported that they watch sports on TV. at all. This is the big looming existential threat to these leagues. Not everybody is worried about it because maybe they're just thinking ahead to the next 5 years and they'll be fine. And so I think all of the sports, in a way, are afflicted with this issue or this fear of what to do and how to capture the attention of young people who just like going on YouTube and watching people play video games. That's the whole thing. And they handle it in different ways. We'll get to the NBA thing, but I just want to add the NHL has handled it in the, I might say, most colorful way. I wouldn't do what they're doing, but they've got this thing that they call their power players, where it's people, I believe, ages 13 through 17. They select a bunch of kids and they have their CMO sit down with the kids, ages 13 to 18, just looked it up. And they just literally have these children tell in these very official regular meetings, tell them how to run the league and what to do. Obviously, during 2020, 2021, it was ramp up the social justice. And so that's what hockey did. But hey, it's a form of focus group research, but they've formalized it and they've made an event of it that you're one of their power players for this year. And the kids sit down with the suits and they tell them what to do because the NHL is terrified about becoming irrelevant. Now, basketball's ambitions to internationalize. Yeah, it's a funny story. It's almost like one of those monkey's paw wishes that gets fulfilled in a way that you wouldn't want. The NBA was so just invested in internationalizing. They globalized it. I mentioned David Stern, the commissioner, going to China.
The NBA's adventure into China, they were so invested in it. They poured a lot of resources into it. David Stern, the former commissioner in the 90s, brokered deals to just air the games over there for free. And they did generate this large fan base. And China produced this 7'6" center, Yao Ming, back in the day. And my God, China, there's a lot of nationalism. There was a lot of curiosity. Who knows what the numbers are as far as how many people watched, but a lot of people watched. I would go, when I was in New York, there was this, I lived in Sunset Park, which is kind of like the Chinatown of Brooklyn, when there was a local bar that would play the Rockets games when Yao Ming was on the Rockets, and it was just packed with people watching these games. And so the NBA assumed this glorious future of being the most popular sport in China. Even if it was trailing football and always would, it had this answer, and it was going to be international. It didn't exactly work out that way. I think it didn't for reasons that a lot of people are aware of. You know, they've seen it in the headlines, and there are these other reasons that people maybe discuss sotto voce or haven't really known how to talk about. The first was the Daryl Morey incident. When China took over Hong Kong, Daryl Morey, general manager, I think then of the Rockets, which made it even more explosive, tweeted a free Hong Kong meme. And the summary of what the reaction was is China just cut off all contact and ended it right there. Just ended it. No more NBA games on TV, demanded apologies, and it put the league in this very awkward position because in America, theoretically, we believe in free speech. And it was this big, ugly incident that I think adversely impacted the NBA's popularity domestically as well, because I saw that at The Athletic, the publication I wrote for, people were furious at LeBron James when he was interviewed, just being angry towards Morey. And I think nationalism in general is underestimated by a lot of people. People who fly to different countries for a living can underestimate it. And I think that it represented a cleave point, not just, it was almost the worst of all worlds. It was almost like how the Democratic Party somehow managed to alienate not just the Jews, but also the Arabs in the last election cycle. Somehow it alienated the NBA further from the domestic audience and also cut off contact with China. And even if there has been some resumption of talks and openings, and you'll read a headline here or there about the NBA regenerating that dynamic of airing games in China and selling jerseys in China, you're just never going to undo the knowledge that can all be ripped away in a second. I mean, how do you invest in that sort of thing? How can you confidently invest in something that unstable. Now, the aspect of it that I think is the sneaky aspect and why I was a seller on this dynamic, as opposed to just assuming that it could be copacetically get resumed, once Daryl Morey learns to be more quiet or whatever, is that China's a very nationalistic country. They poured so many resources into creating more NBA players, and the NBA joined them, and they just couldn't do it. They could not do it. Adam Silver, the now commissioner of the NBA, I was there in a press conference in 2019 for the NBA Finals, and he was expressing his frustration over this, that they wanted a Chinese superstar, that they're trying to help the Chinese Olympic team, which to American ears, that's a little odd. And they just they couldn't do it. They had these academies over there in China. ESPN actually had an expose about some of the horrific treatment of players. And it's odd. I mean, Japan has produced NBA players. Finland has produced an NBA player. There are these small countries that have produced NBA players in the last few years. Not only
Lithuania, like
Yeah.
Slovenia. I mean, these are tiny countries.
tiny countries. And China, it's not just a lack of a superstar, and they dreamed of a superstar. It's just anybody who's NBA level. And you saw the ambitions and the aspirations and what was wanted by the league and the corporate partners. There's this ad from maybe 10 to 15 years ago that depicts the childhood of a Black American player, and a childhood of a Chinese kid, and they're on this collision course, and then eventually they're on the big stage playing each other. This was the fantasy. And this sort of thing happens in sports. It happens in sports sometimes. It's similar to how Tiger Woods had a lot of corporate executives believing the new wave was going to be Black American golfers. And I am Tiger Woods was part of that slogan. And it didn't really happen. It just did not go that way. So sometimes there's just this unacknowledged or tacitly acknowledged want of demographic conquest or national conquest. And it's just not so easy to create greatness and get the parts of the country you want or the countries you want to generate the talent. This was a monkey's paw wish where the NBA said, oh, please, please, God, please make us more international. We want to be international. And the gypsy curse or whatever, or God himself said, there you go. Your wish is my command. Your greatest players are now from Serbia, Slovenia, and Greece. Congratulations. That's what you wanted, right? That's what happened. Tiny Balkan countries became the great players, and China produced zilch.
Let me jump in with some while you were talking about that. I want to look at some data. There's about 560. There is 560 or so. I think NBA players. Here is the foreign-born players. I think by nation. Yeah. So we got Canada has 63. So in the current season, that's the most.
Yeah, they've been getting great. Yeah.
We got in Africa, we got 30 from Nigeria, 14 from Senegal, 9 from South Sudan, 7 from Cameroon, 6 from Democratic Republic of Congo. I'll stop at anything above 5. In the Americas, we got Canada at 63, Brazil at 20, 20 from Puerto Rico, which a lot of American-born Puerto Ricans, I guess. 16 Argentines, 12 Dominican Republic, 11 Jamaica, 8 Bahamas, 7 Mexico. That's not actually bad. Venezuela, 6, and then that ends there for above 5. We got Asia. Okay, all of Asia, and this includes Iran, is 29 players.
Yeah.
8 from China, 6 from Japan, 6 Lebanese, and then
And this is not this isn't the current league. Yeah.
I think it is, right?
No, there are not that many.
First
of all,
right. This would be
there aren't over 500 players in the NBA.
Yeah.
So
Well, it's as of the 20. Yeah. So this is cumulative up to this season.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so we got let's see, we got Europe 351, 52 France, 33 Serbia, 24 Croatia, 21 Germany, 20 Spain, Lithuania 16, Turkey 16, Greece 15, Italy, Russia, then Slovenia at 13, UK at 13, It just keeps going until like you're down in the Czech Republic. Now I want to say Lithuania. I want to double check its population because I think it's
Mm,
really small. Lithuania has a
yeah,
population of 2.9 million. That is
yeah.
a small city in China. Okay, and
It's amazing.
it has produced about the same number of NBA players as the Chinese have. Right?
Yeah.
It's just like crazy.
And had a dramatic impact on the aesthetics and strategy of the NBA. It not only produced players, but Sarunas Marcelunas, I apologize if I pronounced his name incorrectly, brought the Euro step to the NBA, whereby you step one way sideways, the other way sideways, back the other way, similar to how one would ski to propel themselves, which blew our minds as Americans. It was just one of these things we didn't know that we could do. That's a whole other conversation about how sports are very much, I'm looking for the word, but people copy each other. They copy how to do things, and sometimes there's this yeah, yeah.
Mimesis is the
They're
word
mimetic.
used now.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Sports are mimetic. You learn how to do things and you don't necessarily think, oh, what if I did it this different way? Which kind of reminds me of that AlphaGo movie about AI teaching people a whole new way to play that game. But yeah, that's what Sarunas did for Americans and popularized further by some of these other nations like the Argentinians. But it's an amazingly anemic output from China is the point. Amazingly, because they
Well,
cared so much. These other
yeah,
countries didn't care.
they put effort into it. Like, cause I was, I've had a blog about genetics going back to 2002, and one of my co-bloggers who's a geneticist, he predicted just based on just athleticism. He just made a predict because Yao Ming came into the league around then, and he made a prediction that this was not going to be a harbinger of what was to come because he said that the Chinese are just not athletic that way. I think like he was like saying like, oh, their leg to their body proportions and other things.
Mhm.
Because one of the things like was it Seth Davidovitz? Was it Stevens? I think so. No, Steven. No,
Something,
Seth.
some Jewish name, guy, sports, science data. Yes.
Yeah, so we did a podcast a year ago, and like he did like a chart with athleticism to height, and the shorter the guy is in the NBA, which is still pretty tall, they're much more athletic. Whereas the tall guys, like above 7 foot, are much less athletic because they're just tall. My point is like China can produce tall people, but there's only so many shot blockers you need. You need to have athletic people, and the Chinese just do not produce the type of athleticism uh, at scale that the NBA requires.
So I wrote about this a few years ago, the anemic output of China, and there were people, I got this backlash of I'm doing scary race science by describing this, which was ironic, or eugenics or whatever, which was ironic because the way that the Chinese got Yao Ming, by many accounts, was that they had two very tall basketball players have kids, and we got a Yao Ming out of it. Now, there's a lot happening with this. I think if the rules of basketball had remained the same as they were in the 90s and early 2000s, I think it's possible that we could have had more Chinese players. I think there are some tall people in China and northern China and centers. Yao Ming was a really good player and very refined skill set, but he was plodding. He didn't have that athleticism. He was big. I mean, underrated strength, just built like a redwood tree. But the game became different in the NBA. They changed the rules, and I don't necessarily need to get into the granularity of that for your audience, but they changed the rules to make it more of a skill-based perimeter game in ways that undermine the natural height advantage of centers and post-up players. And so based on what happened, I do think that that adversely impacts the sort. I mean, if you change the rules, you change the sport. For whatever reason, this is hard for people to grasp sometimes, but games are just their rules. So if you dramatically change what the rules are, you've changed the sport and you're changing who's going to be good at the sport. That's just how it is. That's just how things are. And these conversations that we're having right now, and I'm realizing that I can have these conversations. I can't get fired. I do have a Substack. It's okay. But I have that little bell ringing in my head of don't talk about this. Don't discuss this. It's the big, scary. But
Yeah.
behind the scenes, NBA scouts discuss this stuff. They talk about this stuff. They notice. You think NBA scouts haven't noticed that a lot of the white players have stubby wingspans and wingspans that are less than their heights? They notice that. But there's also this sense of, even though you can generally get somebody to agree with the proposition that the average person in the Netherlands is taller than the average person in Bolivia, once you get into it in any deeper way, there's some sort of uncomfortable, this is bad, this is scary. It's just it's this funny topic that way. But yeah, I don't think in these boardrooms, to what you're saying, Razib, and to what I'm saying right now, I don't think you'd feel comfortable in these boardrooms when they're dreaming on this grand China future. Somebody in a corporate context would feel comfortable raising their hand and going, are we sure that they're good at the sport and have the capacity to get good at the sport? Are you sure that they've got like the right stock for that? I feel like that's just an ideological no-go zone, which might be why billions of dollars were thrown into the wood chipper of this grand project to have Chinese superstars flood
Yeah.
the NBA.
Well, I mean, you don't know until you try it sometimes. Like, obviously some people made a guess based on just like genetic and like phenotypic variation, just like different characteristics of different populations. I just looking at like the body form and whatnot. Like, so for example, like South Sudan's got like a bunch of players. Like South Sudan, its largest city is like 100,000 people, Juba or whatever. It is like, Donald Trump said shithole country. Well, it is definitely a shithole country. And like no shade on
Very.
them. Like they've been through a lot. They've been through a lot, like civil war. Basically all of the human capital and like infrastructure and all these things were in the northern part of the country. And so when they were partitioned and given independence, they were given nothing. They've been going through civil wars and all this stuff. But they still produce these very long-limbed, relatively tall people, mostly Dinka, I think. And so, like Manute Bull, the late Manute Bull, and they're just good at shot blocking. They're not the most athletic, but like they're tall and they have like huge wingspans because of like that issue you're saying where their wingspans are long, right? And this is just like a biological fact. They're like the people in the tropics that are the closest to northern Europeans in height, like the Dutch in height, right?
Hmm.
And it's just genetic. That's just how they are. And so they have like a bunch of NBA players. One thing is sometimes it's cultural. Culture combined with possibly, like a lack of ability. But like think about it. I just looked it up. India has a total of 10 gold medals ever in the Olympics. Like this is
Hmm.
1.45 billion people, right? And so that's interesting. Some of it is the culture. Like Indians are often vegetarian. They're only interested in a couple of sports like field hockey and cricket, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, come on, 10 for 1.545 billion. You know what I'm trying to say? Slovenia has 10. Like Slovenia has like 3 million people or something. So
Yeah.
at some point you have to say it's a combination of, okay, like how much effort is the state going to put into it? Like that's like the Soviet explanation, the communists, they really focused on that. How much is the culture into it? Is it amenable? And then, what's like the genetic, physical characteristics of the people?
Well, and the culture aspect also is confounded because it's not just a matter, perhaps, of, if we're talking about genetics or we're talking about inborn traits, it's not just how tall are you, how long are you, that kind of thing. I knew one of the coaches for the Warriors, one of the assistant coaches, and what he would do is he would, I remember, go over to Japan. He went over to Japan for a while and he coached basketball in Japan. And I asked him about it. And I asked him about that experience and what the Japanese players were like. And he said, the issue here's the issue. We'll draw up a play and the players will run the play perfectly. They will just be better than American players will. They'll run the play perfectly. But once the game breaks down into chaos, they can't operate in the grays. Now, that's what he's telling me. I don't know. If you want to get mad at me and say that I'm unfairly stereotyping Japanese basketball, that's fine. I don't know. I've never
Wait,
been
wait, wait,
at
wait,
the
wait,
club.
wait. Are you telling me?
I
Are you
know.
telling me the Japanese people follow the rules?
I know.
That seems
I know. It's a
very,
horrible thing to
very
say.
problematic. They're rule
Yes.
following people, in
Yes.
groups, like they do, what they're
Mm.
told and they execute
But
well. Okay, that's
Look, I'm just trying to elevate the
Maybe
stereotype game.
maybe they're
Anybody
not the most maybe they're not the most improvisational, you know?
you don't know about the famous Japanese jazz musicians? That's not something that you're aware of?
All those Japanese buskers.
Well, that's the thing is that sometimes we can think we've got a rough stereotype and it's confounded. Japanese people aren't known to be the most athletic, but I just said they've got the greatest, most talented baseball player anybody's ever seen. So for whatever reason, part of it's the love of the game of baseball, but there's a cultural fit, I guess is what I'm saying, with Japan and baseball. And there doesn't seem to be the same thing for basketball. The inability, as the coach said, to operate in the grays was the problem. Maybe this will change. Maybe
Yeah,
there will be more Japanese basketball players in the
yeah,
future in the NBA. But that's just this. It's this thing of how you go about it or how cultures go about it is different. And one of the interesting things about sports, Razib, is that again, it's not just a matter of your physical capacity. You can see stylistic and strategic expressions of culture out there. I mentioned the Argentinians and the Lithuanians who are doing the Euro step. You could say that they also play in ways that are more like how their country goes about it. And we've seen this in soccer. I know a lot of people have grand, intricate theories on it about how the Dutch, because their culture had to manipulate architecture in small spaces, that it somehow informed the way their soccer strategy went. I don't know if any of that's true, but there is a truth to the general idea that different peoples go about the game differently sometimes.
yeah. No, it makes sense. I mean, I'm just thinking like the NBA. It's like, yeah, there's all these like, ways you could do it with like these different systems and but like a lot of times like the ball goes some crazy direction and it's just like a scrum. It's just chaos. Whereas with baseball, uh, I mean, it can be a little chaotic, but the reality is it's like one player that's like batting and that's hitting and it's got to go from like the first base to the second base to the third base and it does seem a little bit more structured than the NBA would be because a lot of the NBA game, which is actually the fun of the NBA in terms of like
Yeah.
it's not so structured, so, it's not just like, doing the same boring plays over like, there are NBA like, what was it? Like, the okay, I'm dating myself because like, I don't watch it anymore, but, like, the old Chicago Bulls from the 1990s, they would just do the pick and roll every single time, and it was kind of fun when it didn't work out, and they had to do something different, and Jordan had to be basically like, "I'm just gonna take this over, okay? Just gonna do
Yeah.
this," you know? That was actually, like, the fun of it, whereas with baseball, it's been a while since I watched baseball, but I mean, I think part of it is there is like kind of like subtle strategy because of all the restrictions of the rules and the structure of how it works. So I mean, you're right. Like the game is fitted towards the national culture. That totally makes sense. I mean, what I gotta ask you is like, what does Australian rules football say about Australians? Because like that thing, talk about
that they're
chaos, right?
that they're crazy is what it says about them. Yeah, their basketball. It's not just chaos, but I think the idea of it is a structure brings freedom kind of idea, where you've got your skeletal structure of what we're doing, and then something happens and you break off and you make decisions from there, and then a lot of randomness occurs, and that's the sport. And if you are in a culture that is obsessed with conformity, that I'm not saying Japan is that. We're shifting the aperture to China, let's say. Maybe that's not the greatest incubator of how to play basketball. If there's this constant sense of there is always a correct thing to do at all times, that might not be the best way to play basketball. You might need a little more looseness in how you're going about it.
Yeah, and like basketball is. I mean, it was started in America. I think it's very it's been dominated by Black American players for a long time. I think the game is to some extent shaped by that culture where improvisation is super important. Kind of individual athleticism, individual flair. I'm using like stereotype words, but come on, like we know this is true, as opposed to just like some sort of like structured system, which obviously they have to go through that, they have to do it, but This is people have said, I think sports writers have said this, like predominantly white teams in the college, level, college basketball, they tend to play a different type of basketball that's less about the athleticism and more about the system, whereas more black dominated basketball teams tend to focus on more individual athleticism.
Yeah, I can relate to the black teams in this instance because when I was in high school, I would struggle. I would struggle to run plays. I would struggle to run structure. It didn't make sense to me out there that you're supposed to move in a particular way while focused on your other goal, even if another option presents itself. My coach thought I was stupid, is what he thought. He was shocked to learn I was going to college, actually. Now I'm getting into me territory, probably because I just want to make sure that I'm not sounding racist. So I'm jumping in to say I relate to the black players. It's not
Yeah,
they don't
yeah.
all play the same way. And the white people, they don't all play the same way.
Well,
No,
I mean, you
I
are
think
you are quite a
this
swarthy fellow. We've talked about that.
yes, yes, I'm quite swarthy. But actually, the strategic complexity that I see is in Europe. The NBA coaches will get together sometimes and have clinics where they watch what the European coaches are doing, and it's intricate and it's complicated. And again, this is part of the refinement culture where it's just going to get more and more and more complex as there's more and more money and attention on it. But I don't know if it's ever going to reach the kind of optimized, you always know what you're supposed to do level that opens itself up to players from China doing well. The players that have been doing very well, as we've noted, are from the Balkans, these small Balkan countries. And I don't think, beyond what you've said of tall people being out there, I don't know if anybody has any kind of cultural explanation. There are these kind of cliche, I don't believe them, but people say it type thing about the struggle of the war in Yugoslavia. And, I don't know. Maybe there's something to it, but it just seems like this region of the world is producing the best white boy athletes and nobody quite knows why.
Yeah, yeah. That is a thing. So speaking of this region of the world and the white boy athletes, you have kind of a story to tell. You already told me this, and I think you've already written or talked about this extensively. But about this trade, this shocking trade, the Dallas Mavericks sent, and you know, arguably now is he like the best up and coming NBA player right now?
People would have said top three. It's getting
Mhm.
a little bit questionable with him coming off of injury, but he is a prodigy who is among the best players in Europe when he was a teenager and a fairly young teenager, and was great effectively from the moment he stepped on an NBA court. Luka Doncic or Doncic. I should pronounce it somewhat correctly. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And I should also add, like, I just like checked the heights. Uh, the tallest countries in Europe for males, it's actually Bosnia, Herzegovina, and the Netherlands. They both tie at 6.5 feet average. Montenegro 6. Slovenia is 5'11.5. And then like it gets like Germany, Denmark, Sweden, Lithuania, stuff like that. So Croatia's like 5'11. And they're all, Slovenia's 5'11. They're all up there. And then it starts to get like United States is 5'9 average. Yeah, that tracks. Belgium's 5'9.5. Italy is 5'9. Yeah, that tracks. Although I don't know if I felt like maybe this is because the United States has like a lot of short Latinos. I'm sorry, just like I've been to Italy. I'm 5'8". I definitely felt taller in Italy than I do in the
Mm.
United States, but that's probably the demographic of who I spend a lot of time with. So setting that
Mm.
aside, the height is a thing. So you got this like Luca guy. I didn't know anything about him. This is how much I follow the NBA. And like I read like an ESPN or some article in the middle of the night. It was like, this is a shock. Why would they do this? Are they retarded? And I think we can say that now on the podcast, because it's just
Love if
like,
that was. I would love if that was said on
no, I mean,
ESPN.
okay, like, like I just like read it, and I'm just like, I think like basically my one sentence takeaway was like, did they just say this is retarded in like 4 paragraphs? Because they didn't really have any explanation. They're like, the truth
Yeah.
behind what happened is going to be like a big deal because like we don't know why they would do this, and I'm like, okay, like this seems like dumb. Okay, I do have to say, like, a conspiracy theory, and you're gonna tell us what you think is the real truth, but the conspiracy theory that I thought was like, well, if he's one of the best young players for the NBA, it is better if one of the best young players is in LA
Mhm.
with the TV contracts than in Dallas. That's what I would say. And like advertising and everything, but
I saw somebody post a few days ago that the Dallas-Fort Worth metro is the 4th largest metro, but has 0 cultural impact,
yep,
and
exactly true.
people were arguing against that, but
Well, I mean, how have
something
you
to it.
how often have you been to Dallas?
Well, I mean, I used to go for work, but never not for work, never not to see a
Yeah.
Mavericks game.
But I mean,
Nobody
wouldn't you say
says
okay, what I will
nobody
say with
says,
Dallas.
"Honey, we're vacationing. Where are we vacationing to?" Dallas, which I think is an unusual. I mean, Dallas is in a very odd position as a city where it's kind of a glamorous city and a city where status is very important, and yet nobody would vacation there.
Oh,
I can't think of other places
I mean,
like this.
this is gonna be a tangent, but I'm just gonna like say because I've lived in Texas now for almost 9 years. I will say, Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio are great places to raise families. They're great places to have careers. The housing is cheap. The commutes are not the best sometimes, but whatever. And Dallas, for example, specifically, is a place. It's a great place if you want to raise a big family in a McMansion. Okay,
Mm,
that is Dallas. That is not culture, right? People in Dallas are rich, they're not wealthy. No, that's not totally true, but you know what I'm saying? Like, Dallas is like the insurance capital to some extent of America. It has a lot of finance going on. It does a lot of the financial transactions relate to the energy sector. Houston does more of the engineering aspect. Obviously, Dallas Fort Worth is the end of a cattle herding terminus and stuff like that. There's a lot of economic activity. It doesn't produce the culture.
yeah.
There's D Magazine, there's things. I mean, like George W. Bush loves there.
Well,
I don't want to undersell it, but you go to Dallas and you're like, this is like middle class, middle brow utopia. And I think that's what's going on. It doesn't have Riz, it doesn't have pizzazz, it doesn't have a
yeah.
personality beyond the McMansion.
Oh,
And people want
it's got personality. It's got that strange cowboy LARP thing going where
sure. Yeah, like
people
the big D, it's like, oh, like the big hair, but it doesn't it's not aspirational to coastal professional managerial class types in any way.
no.
And if you can't get those markets, you are not marketable. Austin, on the other hand, a much smaller city,
Yeah.
does have the
Yeah.
Riz and the cultural, partly because there's so many transplants from the coast here. But Austin is the only Ideopolis of the Texas cities. Like if you are a engineer in San Francisco or an artist in New York, what city in Texas would you want to go live in?
It's obvious. I mean,
Yeah,
also
Austin.
just the topography, the scenery. Austin has these
Sure. Yeah.
pretty Texas hills surrounding it.
Yeah.
Dallas, not I mean,
It's
people
flat. Flat.
the the PMCs, they like the scenic. They're into that. They wanna
Yeah.
go
And like,
hiking and whatnot.
yeah. And compared to California, Austin's like nothing. But like there are parts like Westlake, around the Bee Caves, the hill country there, where it's like, if it's not the summer, so it's not like torrid. It's not like well, it's not quite like a swamp like Houston, but like in March during South by Southwest, you go there, you feel like you're in Southern California, right? So it has like the ambiance. Anyway, this was like a tangent. Back to the sports and
I
this
love it.
Dallas trade that is like totally perplexing to the uninitiated like us.
No, I mean, I love this kind of conversation. My colleagues and I, back when I was a beat writer, we would just constantly rank top 5 NBA cities you'd live in and bottom 5, and this was a constant conversation about these places. But yes, Luka Doncic, the infamous trade, so many contours to it. The guy who did the trade, I had actually delivered the greatest humiliation of the general manager who did the trade's career up until that point. I had badly damaged his reputation, and I didn't seek out to do it. I had no real animus towards him, but he was a former Nike sneaker rep, and I wrote about how Nike lost Steph Curry and had this botched pitch meeting for Steph Curry, and they lost him to Under Armour because it was such a shit show. And the PowerPoint was repurposed materials from a pitch to Kevin Durant. and one of the officials there pronounced his name incorrectly. I think the way you did earlier in the podcast, called him Stefan and offended him. And Steph Curry then becomes this multi-billion-dollar concern for Under Armour. And the sneaker rep who is assigned to this duty, Nico Harrison, was the guy who presided over the meeting. Now, I hadn't heard anything bad about Nico Harrison. It just so happened it was his meeting. I tried to get him to talk to me so he could perhaps give me some sort of clarifying context. And maybe you'd say he was an honorable man and he didn't squeal because he didn't talk to me. But the result of it is that it's his name in the headline, having fumbled perhaps a guy who would have been the greatest sneaker salesman since Michael Jordan. And what's interesting about that business is it's bigger than the NBA business, and one individual can just move markets. You know, Michael Jordan, arguably more important to Nike than Steve Jobs was to Apple, but I'm digressing. Let's get to the trade. So you might be asking, why does a guy go from being a sneaker rep at Nike to running the Dallas Mavericks? If you're wondering if that is a usual trajectory, it is not. That has never happened. Something like that has never happened. Generally, when you become an NBA general manager, the guy who does the trades, you have extensive experience within the NBA. You maybe, and it's a recent trend, are an NBA agent, but even in that situation, you are in the NBA. You are in an adversarial context negotiating contracts with NBA teams. Nico Harrison was something called a sneaker rep. And the job of the sneaker rep, in most instances, is to be buddy-buddy with the players and to hang out with them. They're often former college athletes. They're guys with charisma. They can take the player to the strip club, whatever, and become one of the entourage. And they become this odd liminal presence that can communicate as a liaison between the sneaker company and the player. Why does this exist? This seems like a very strange system. I mean, in many instances, the sneaker rep will call up Nike and chew out Nike and tell Nike that the player can't go to the commercial shoot and almost act like the player's lawyer. Why would Nike then pay somebody to do something like this? The answer to that question is that the players like it, and the players are these intensely valuable commodities. And so the players like having this kind of hired friend that communicates with the company. So these sneaker reps, they're just part of this strange culture. But is the job I'm describing the type of job that you would think would prepare you to do something as intensely complicated as run an NBA team and do all the scouting and understand value of assets and everything else? No, it wouldn't be. But Nico Harrison got hired to be Dallas Mavericks general manager, I think, for a few reasons. And eventually we will get to the trade. You know, I'm just giving the background. I'm just laying the groundwork, Razib. Hope I'm telling the story right. Mark Cuban during...
I'm following you. You're doing
Mark
a
Cuban.
good job expositing.
Yes, I'm trying to exposit all over the place. Mark Cuban, maybe you heard of him. Russ Hanneman character in Silicon Valley based on him. Former now, owner of the Dallas Mavericks. Somebody who is always in the public eye, very reactive to whatever the current thing is. He gets religion on DEI. He becomes perhaps the most vocal proponent of DEI, says that he uses DEI in his hiring. Actually creates a controversy where somebody from the EEOC says you can't do that, that's illegal, to use race and gender in your hiring. I'm not saying that's why Nico Harrison was hired. Nico Harrison happens to be black. But I am saying that Cuban hired somebody who is unqualified for the position. Unqualified. I'll say it. You won't hear it from other sources of media, but you're unqualified. Being a sneaker rep, and again, I heard nothing bad about Nico, even if I wrote the thing and I broke that story. You're not qualified to run an NBA team. But it was okay for a while. Nico, for a few years...
Just to be clear, he was hired in 2021. This is when you would hire someone like that.
Mm-hmm. Someone like that. Like what, Razib? Like what?
You just want a black person because you want to put black people in positions of power. That's what they were doing.
As a funny aside,
Prominence.
Cuban also hired a president of the team who was a black woman who, I believe she might have been at Goldman Sachs or one of these banks, and cold called her, and she didn't know who he was. She didn't know who the Dallas Mavericks were. It just almost it seemed like it was this moment of, I need whatever demographic. The other background is that the Dallas Mavericks had a Me Too scandal or two and had a lot of bad press about unsavory behavior of executives and others within the organization towards the ladies. So all of this was happening. This is the culture out of which it sprung. And it worked for a while. The Dallas Mavericks did quite well after Nico Harrison was hired, but the unacknowledged aspect of it that everybody in the NBA knew to be true was that Mark Cuban was running the Dallas Mavericks. He was effectively the general manager. He was owner of the team, but he was on all the trade calls. He was calling everybody up. His grand vision, I think, was to have a charismatic former Nike guy in Nico connect him to players, tell him about guys who might be interested, not actually run the thing. What ends up happening is, I think right before, it might have been 2024, Cuban shockingly suddenly sells his majority share of the Dallas Mavericks. He sells it to the Adelsons. You might have heard of them. Razib is putting his finger up, presumably
really
to do
quickly.
to do his Jewish research and
No. I didn't. What I was doing research while you were talking because it's just like I want to get the context. This is how out of it I am when it comes to sports. I had no idea the Cuban had sold the Dallas Mavericks until you told me before this podcast. So just put that out there.
I mean, it's the thing most people associate with him. He still has a minority share of the team. So, but he sells the team. He sells the team to the Adelsons. The team has been doing pretty well at the time that he sells them. And as far as anybody knows from the outside, if you're buying the team, I would guess that the Adelsons asked about Nico Harrison and Mark Cuban. He's great. Great job. And didn't say, hey, actually, I'm the guy running the operation and calling everybody. And even if I criticize Mark Cuban in a variety of ways, he's had 20 years or so effectively running a team. So he Peter Principles a Nike sneaker rep whose primary job back in the day is to ingratiate himself with superstars.
Wait, tell people what the Peter Principle is. Just like I think a lot of people won't know. Just really quick.
When you get promoted to one level above your competence, as happens in organizations. And I think that there's often a DEI accelerant. There's this other side conversation, by the way, that I think is so frustrating in the culture where we had all this DEI hiring promoted, but nobody's a DEI hire. It's like the opposite of the whole it's not happening, it's good that it's happening. It's good that it's happening, this DEI hiring, and then you say, well, this person got hired because no. It didn't happen.
Yeah.
Like that.
What I will say about that, some people are saying that you shouldn't say that just every black person, for example, hired is a DEI hire. The problem, though, is the criticism of people that have affirmative action DEI is when you do it, you wonder about every black person. Like that's literally like the argument that they make. And so what's happening here is people are doing what people said that was going to happen when you change the selection criteria for any position and add, you really, really weight race strongly, right? So,
Yeah.
the whole thing is like fraught with like, okay, but this is what we predicted would happen. So why are you guys freaking out about it?
Yeah, and I think it's been a status quo that's just unsustainable, where there was this demand on the culture and institutions that you make hires with a heavy skew towards census categories or certain census categories, and then nobody is allowed to judge the results of that or to say it ever happens in the specific. It just seems, I don't know, like a double think. I got some pushback for writing about this in the context of this trade. And no, I can't prove to you that that's why Nico Harrison got hired, but I can say that the guy who hired him is a florid, effusive proponent of DEI who says he uses DEI in such a way that the EEOC is saying, chill out, buddy. That famously conservative EEOC. And that this individual was utterly unqualified for the job he got, and it went disastrously. I can just tell you those things. Those things all happen.
Yeah. One thing I'll say is like, I do know enough about like these professional sports leagues that it's not uncommon sometimes that, owners, there's certain owners, like, I think Jimmy Jones of the Dallas or not Dallas Cowboys won.
Jerry
But
Jones.
owners
Jerry Jones.
or Jerry Jones. Yeah, Jimmy Jones.
This is why you think Dallas has no culture. You're not clued in enough to the actual culture of the Dallas Cowboys being the identity.
You know what? The people in Dallas are gonna give me crap, but whatever. I don't have that many listeners in Dallas because they don't listen and read stuff like that I do because they're not intellectual. Oops, sorry. But sometimes they become general managers. Sometimes they become general managers because they can hire themselves, and most of the time it doesn't work out, and that's because they don't have the talent and the skills, even though they think that they do. Right? That is just like DEI hiring, insofar as the criteria is not your record of experience or your skills as much as because I can. Like, I am the general manager. I am the owner. I can do whatever I want to do, and I want to do this. But, if they weren't the owner, if they were somebody else who was the owner and not them, they would be like, no, this is crazy. It always seems crazy. Sometimes it works, but most of the time when the owner gets super involved in these sorts of selections, it's bad. Like, you need to leave it to the professionals, right? You can say that candidly. The problem with the DEI stuff is you can't say it candidly because it's, quote, taboo. But, if you're going to do a race-blind selection, well, there are people. I mean, the NBA, there aren't that many general manager spots. The reality is there's only so many people with so much experience. So it's going to be a really small pool, unfortunately. If you want to change the pool, you have to look really, really downstream. What you're talking about is a situation where they're like, you know what? We're going to fix the pipeline problem by just putting someone in there that is not in the pipeline. And that doesn't usually work.
No, and there have been good black NBA GMs. Masai Ujiri, who won a championship for the Toronto Raptors, which would have been thought to be a near impossible goal, for instance. But Masai just rose through the ranks of basketball. And slowly over a period of time in different situations, wasn't just hired out of Portland, out of Nike HQ to run a basketball team, and even if the sneaker rep is intimately involved in the NBA, it's in the specific context of, again, ingratiating yourself to a player and not making all these other sorts of decisions, which brings us to this situation. So the trade itself, Luka, he was just about to turn 26, just entering the prime of the career, top 3 player, enormously valuable, this sort of player, traded to the Lakers for 32-year-old Anthony Davis, who's a very good player. You could say was a superstar, maybe not quite at that level, but big injury risk. His nickname is Street Clothes. Charles Barkley gave it to him because of all the injuries. 1 first-round pick, another player named Max Christie, who might be good. It's just I don't want to go through it all just to say that in the NBA, you trade a player like Luka, you get just a raft of assets. Such players never get traded.
No,
absent from demand.
He is a franchise player. So a franchise player, you should get a whole franchise.
Yeah, you get so much. So the shock, this was a trade where in the NBA world, everybody thought it was a prank. The guy who broke the story, Shams Charania, the lead NBA newsbreaker, thought he had been hacked when he was tipped off about it. And when he reported it, everybody had the same reaction of thinking he had been hacked. It was just an unthinkable trade. And it might work out. I don't know. Luka has looked not so good in his first few games as a Laker. But the bottom line is it's a bad trade because that's just not the assets that you would get for that trade, and everybody understood it. And it's the sort of thing that you do maybe if your job has been about ingratiating yourself with players, having a good dynamic with a superstar player. Now you've got this Slovenian dude and you've got no real connection to him. He acts like a boy king because he's a prodigy and he's been doing his thing, and he comes from a different culture than what you're used to. And if your whole life, your whole job is you're nothing unless you've got an in with a superstar, well, Razib, maybe we call it's like elect a new people. You trade him for Anthony Davis, who is a Nike guy. I mean, Luka is Jordan Brand, but Anthony Davis is a Nike guy, American from Chicago. Maybe you want him in the building alongside Kyrie Irving and not this Slovenian guy who has shut you out. I'm speculating when I say that. I'm just trying to come up with a way to make the inexplicable explain.
It doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't make any sense. So it shocked everybody. And again, history might work out in such a funny way that Anthony Davis plays really well, and Luca, because he's a boy king prodigy, he's had weight issues, and maybe his career, it's the True Hollywood Story version, and it just goes off the rails. But the main point is that just the assets collected is just not what you would get if you knew what you were doing. It's an act of incompetence, and it's resulted in protesters showing up to these Mavericks games, people getting pulled out of the arena for the signs that they have, or mouthing things to the jumbotron where they mouth "Fire Nico," and it's just this fascinating instance that you're not allowed to. I'm saying you're not allowed to. You could, but you don't see this in regular media of going, "Hey, it's funny that the biggest proponent of DEI." Peter principled a guy who effectively submitted the most infamous trade in American sports history, potentially, at least in the immediate aftermath of it. Do we read any implications of that? Do we talk about that at all? The answer is, of course, no, except in certain pockets on Substack.
Yeah, and like just to be clear here, again, I don't follow a lot of this stuff, but there have been plenty of black coaches, people who have like done great things in the NBA, NFL, even like in baseball. Baseball is like less because there's not as many black
I
players.
will submit that black people have succeeded in basketball. I'm bold enough to say it, Razib. But no, yeah,
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
been
So
success.
what you're talking here is just like, I mean, kind of like a worst case issue with DEI, where it's like the person is in an empty suit. You're saying that Cuban was really doing the work, and this guy was just a face. And Adelsons did not do their homework,
Well,
or
let's be generous with the Peter principle. I think that it's quite possible that he was excellent in the role that Nike had. I never heard a bad thing about how he went about his role. I'm sure that he was exceedingly professional in his role as a sneaker rep, and he rose through the ranks there, and he became respected. I didn't kill his career when I reported the Steph Curry thing, so he must have been doing something behind the scenes. But yeah, this is the unfortunate aspect. And there's this other. I was on Blocked and Reported talking about this. There's just been this push over the years of, you would think sports is utterly meritocratic and everybody accepts that the people out there are just the best people. And for the most part, they do when it comes to the field of play. But then there's all this cultural pressure that built up during the Great Awakening of, well, we've got to do something about the coaches, and we've got to do something about the general managers, and we've got to do something about the owners. And these leagues just got so self-conscious about it, would talk about how they needed to do better. So it's not just a matter of maybe Mark Cuban getting caught up in the current thing. This is coming from on high, the ideas that you need to have a different demography than what you currently have, and you can't accept the way we accept the results on the field of play, that it's similar when it comes to the decision making, that we just have who we have. We don't it's not okay to just have this mentality of there's a certain disproportionate amount of people here and that's fine and we all go about our lives.
yeah. I mean, this is outside of sports. I was talking to a friend of mine. When there is a feedback, like in sports, there's a feedback. So Heather McDonald has written about this. I haven't read it all because it's depressing. But basically, during the peak of the Great Awakening, during the racial reckoning, there was like an enormous number of DEI hires in many places. Okay, and these people are going through the system in academia, in publishing, and other places. What happened in publishing was documented. And again, the mainstream media has to be very careful how it talks. But let's just like cut to the chase here. They hired a bunch of black women in publishing to be editors, or you know basically promote these books, buy books, sell books, whatever, pick good books. They didn't have any background in publishing, but this is 2020 and people are, what, I'm gonna try to not word I'm trying to be a little bit more professional adult. I'm not gonna use the R
Ah,
word. But you know what I'm trying to say? Like, they're not like thinking with their brain, they're thinking with their heart. They hire people without background in these fields, you know, school principals, like executives and other like professions. And publishing is very, very domain specific. They come into publishing, and then 2 years later, they're all getting laid off. And there's an article, I think, in the Washington Post about how horrible this is, and racism, blah blah blah. But the issue is, in publishing, it's a low margin industry. If you're not selling books, if you're not making money, you're out of here. They were not selling books. They didn't have the relationships. They didn't understand how it really worked because they weren't in publishing. So they hired a bunch of people because they thought, like, let's just like throw spaghetti against the wall and it'll stick. It didn't stick. But there's an immediate feedback in publishing. There's an immediate feedback in sports, right? Like
Yep.
if you get a coach because you like the coach or the coach's race or whatever, uh, and they don't perform, they don't perform. They get fired. Like they don't have like a long coaches. Aside from like Chuck Noll and like Don Shula, right? In
Yeah.
NFL, coaches do not have like long tenures. Even the best, like Pat Riley, went from the Lakers, left the Lakers, was sportscaster, then the Miami Heat. Like these sorts of things.
Well,
So my
I
point
think this.
is, yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't want to interject. I think
No,
this
but I
is
think
like,
I think I made my point. My point is like you hire people that are not good fits. Everyone's gonna notice at some point, and
yeah.
if it's a system where like money is on the line, you're gonna eventually say no.
Yeah. I think this issue might be the biggest chasm between I live in the Bay Area. It might be the biggest chasm between myself and a lot of my progressive friends is that my intuition, and I'd say it's a little more study than intuition, but my assumption is that it's more corrosive to hire on anything other than trying to get the absolute best person for the job than they think. I think they think that there's a lot of flex in the system, 6 one, half dozen the other. There are a bunch of equally qualified candidates, and if you happen to go with the more demographically desirable one, the one candidate is like a rated 95 and maybe is another 96 and there's another, 93, and it really doesn't matter if you tilt it to the 93 because they're the demographic, the census category we want. I think that's what they operate under, but I've just seen it happen again and again that talent is real, and the margin in so many businesses between success and failure is razor thin. It really is. And when you start hiring on the basis of anything other than who the best for the job is, and people are going to also maybe push back and say that in the NBA there's a lot of nepotism, especially at the ownership level, and there is, and that has adverse effects as well. But if you make the main thing something other than the main thing, I think it's corrosive on multiple levels. I also think it's institutionally demoralizing. When other people are looking around, they're going, "Oh, the main reason someone gets elevated in this institution, it's not how good a job one does." I think that there are knock-on effects to that. So this issue, I think, is just we're stumbling in it after talking about these other issues of how talent is cold and curated. But I think the DEI issue is just massive. It's of massive importance. It's of massive political importance. And I know a lot of my friends like to roll their eyes at it precisely because a lot of conservatives are shouting DEI all the time. And, sometimes when it's not warranted. And I think there's an ugliness to when you see somebody who's competent get dismissed that way, or get that shouted at them as an epithet. But this is a real issue. I think it's just one of the most politically powerful issues in addition to just being societally important. This idea of can we just hire who we want to hire absent these massive pressures to do it differently.
Yeah, so I do have to say, it is so I don't know if ironic is the correct word, but we've been talking about sports and the first half, we were talking about how, just like not that many Chinese players. There's apparently like two Indian origin players that have ever. One guy got drafted. He played on the D League, and then there was like a Canadian Indian. Okay, so if we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, where's the diversity and equity and inclusion in the NBA
Well, this is
among
something
the
that Mark
players?
Cuban would get as a rebuttal all the time, and he would sneer at it and mock it. I remember on social media, and I would think, yeah, it's such a cliche response. You go like, oh, it's such a cliche response. Do you know why it's a cliche response? Because it's an excellent, obvious rebuttal that everybody is going to turn to. That's why
Because
it's the rebuttal.
NBA does not look like America. Now, the fact that they're tall males, okay, that kind of makes sense. But why do they have to be black? What's up with that?
I mean, and everybody who is reasonable, I think, accepts it or isn't mad about it and goes, "Well, these just happen to be the these happen to be the best players." And there are a lot of things like this, or why are so many women who run nail salons Asian? There actually is a reason for it that's quite interesting that I learned recently about how it all got started. I think it might have actually gotten started as a trend in Texas, but it just doesn't matter to most people. Look, I don't know why. That's just how it is. That's just what it is. And I think it's fine if certain groups want to do better or achieve more or attain more and make an emphasis. But I think where you run into trouble is when there's this top down pressure to engineer a result done by people who are utterly naive about what the actual talent pipeline is. And
Yeah.
if anybody does pushback, they then get attacked and assailed as some sort of bigot, as opposed to somebody who just wants standards applied equally and rigorously. And sports, at least, there's pretty low stakes. I know some Mavericks fans might disagree, but once you start getting in this territory of medical professionals and pilots, I mean, look, I think it's just one of these topics where I feel very much divergent from people in my social milieu who think it's effectively forbidden and taboo to have any sort of objection to the push and the way things went.
Yeah. I do have to say, I remember Linsanity with Jeremy Lee in the early teens. Okay.
Jeremy Lin.
Or whatever, Jeremy Lin. Yeah, whatever. Give me an American name, right? But as Amy Wax would say. But when I was, that really like fired up a lot of Asian Americans, and even like, I'm not East Asian, but I was like, oh, okay, like someone who looks a little different, you know?
Mm, yeah.
But you know what? Like at the end of the day, he was a journeyman player. He never became like a superstar because he didn't have the skill level of a superstar, which to be fair, like he's a very skilled basketball player if he's in the
Yeah.
NBA and he was a starter at some point. But that does show you that, they say like, representation matters. Yeah, it matters some, but the reality is what really matters is can you score, can you
Well,
play? And that's ultimately like how you're gonna get hired and fired. Like the representation stuff is a way to like get like a little bit more, visibility in China for him in particular, even though he was Taiwanese, I
mhm.
think.
Well, he
And
eventually
advertising.
yeah, he eventually wound up playing in, the China League.
Yeah.
He was, I think it's weird to say, the victim of racism because there's also this aspect of benefiting from his background, but there was so much palpable resentment towards him from the NBA players in his heyday,
Wait, why?
and
Oh, just because they thought
because
he was being given attention because he was Asian and he wasn't that good.
yeah, if you ever wanna rewatch an NBA game, an obscure random NBA game, the Heatles, the Miami Heat super team of LeBron, Chris Bosh, and Dwayne Wade, they, I guess, spiritually, if not technically, ended Linsanity when Jeremy Lin faced them, and they played such just this savage, aggressive defense against him, just ripping the ball away, surrounding. And it felt as though there was just a little more to it than whatever the game strategy was. And many people reported that Carmelo Anthony, who was the star of the New York Knicks at that time, was resentful of the elevation of Lynn. And it was not a welcoming atmosphere. It was this double-edged sword. It was this dynamic of the NBA being orgasmic over this Asian American basketball success and promoting it heavily, while the NBA is a league with a lot of resentment. It's how the sport is set up. There's one ball. If you're getting more shots, I'm getting fewer shots. If you're getting more money, I'm not getting as much money. It's not like baseball where we can all eat. It's not like baseball where if you hit more home runs, it doesn't adversely impact me. And so it's somewhat ingrained. And there is this sense of this guy too big for his britches, doesn't deserve it. Why is it a big deal that he's getting all this attention? It was not a nice atmosphere for Jeremy Lin.
Yeah, I vaguely remember that. And that's how it goes. I mean, he was the great yellow hope. There was definitely some like racial aspect to it, and I can see why that would be like. I mean, come on, like we're here to play ball. not to be like role models, you know.
Mhm.
So I'm not like totally unsympathetic to that. Overall, whatever, like he did a great thing. But again, my point here, the core competency is to get that ball in the basket and display your virtuosity and excellence for the people watching. And
Well,
so it's very meritocratic that way, right?
it is, and I think that people can more easily accept that when the results are as tangible as they are in sports. But I think when it gets fuzzier and you can't actually see the product and how it's generated, that's when meddlesome idealists start to try to change who gets the job because they've got some sort of sense that it's all abstract, it's all fuzzy, who even knows, so who cares? And I think part of the problem is then some of these industries, even if you can't see what goes into it, there's a tangible talent to
Yeah.
product dynamic, and what you get out of it matters. If you replace, I mentioned Steve Jobs earlier, if you replace Steve Jobs with some other person, for instance, when he took over Apple, you're not getting the same Apple, even if you can't actually see what Steve Jobs is doing. So I think that's just been part of the
Yeah.
the issue in trying to
Yeah, that's fair.
in trying to census
Well, let's
category your hiring.
Well, we've been talking for a while, so we'll close out soon. But let me bring up something like because I think this is like an organic, like non-sports topic. So, basically, my friend Cremu online, they,
Are
I,
we allowed to say Cremue's real name? At what point? The
no,
vibe
no,
has shifted.
well, it has, but like like some people are, some people. I'm not gonna say what I think of that. I'm not. Like I've told this person that they should like just give up their like anon pseudo thing, but like even though
I'll
let's
say
just
if
let,
you
oh,
if
let
you if you haven't self-doxed, you're gonna be doxed. It's
sure,
just
sure, sure,
it's
sure.
it's your
It
choice.
is. It's gonna happen. I mean, and also anyway, I'm gonna change the
Yeah.
subject from him, but or
Yeah.
them. But the point was they were talking about how there's been a turnover among the Democratic intelligentsia or the staffing class, the operatives, from like having a lot of Jewish men to having like more black women. Now this is like not literally true. It could be like a Latino woman. It could be like I don't know, like a gay man who's not Jewish. Like there's just been like a more push for diversity. Like I've talked to people that are like, yeah, at like the younger ranks of like 20 somethings, there's almost no straight white men Democratic operatives. It's all gay white men, and minorities and white women. Okay, so one of the things Cremu said is, and I have heard this too, like because people are like, oh, he's just making this up. No, I've heard this. I know people in politics, and if you look at Obama's like war room in 2008, it was very white, very male, a lot of Jewish guys, frankly, and so with DEI and the racial reckoning, Biden did not have that same type of team. Okay, Biden's team looked much more diverse and was much more equitable,
I
and
remember
yeah,
there was like memes about it. There was a picture and there was some haggard
yeah.
looking young white man who looked miserable, who was working on something in the background, and who knows what's true, but people were saying that's the guy who's doing all the work. We
And
projected
there and all
whatever.
the other it was speechwriters, it was, like, the speechwriting team, I think, and it was for Biden, it was, like, almost all women, of various different races, but, my point that I'm saying here is, like, Democrats privately have said to me, and actually I've had friends who are Republican who are happy about this. So, I had a friend, he's going to be in a prominent position in the Trump administration, in the cabinet. And so I'm not going to say who it is, but it is someone who the listeners of the podcast would recognize. But in any case, they like he messaged me after that tweet, and because I retweeted it and I commented on it, and he said, I literally thought that about Kamala Harris's campaign because she famously didn't do too much media. She didn't do many town halls. He looked at her schedule and he said it was like they were not understanding that this was a big fucking deal and they should work their asses off. And so he thinks that, yeah, like in terms of like they hired the B and the C team because they thought, hey, everybody can do this. Actually, you know what? This is the
Well,
toughest campaign probably in the whole world, and you got to hire the best people, whatever their race, sex, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there. You're trying to get me into trouble. You lead me on this limb, but there's a lot there because maybe give people credit for not being hypocrites and just having the courage of their
Oh, that's
convictions.
fair.
And if they
That's
think
fair.
if they think that we need to do more diversity and it's going to work out for whatever reason they do it, then I guess they were following through with what they believed philosophically. But I think that with elections, okay, there's the selection aspect, but then there's this other aspect of you've become so unpopular with the groups that you're so obviously hiring against that you don't get them even showing up to apply. There's that aspect as well. This is people are going to maybe listen to this and go, "Why do I care about what the sports guy thinks about politics?" But I think that this is one of the biggest if you came to me and hired me to advise the Democratic Party, uh, even though I'm a white male, uh, though some would argue that I'm not. But anyway, but if you came to me and you asked me, what is the number one issue we have? What is the number one problem? What is the thing that we need to fix right now? I would say it's the collapse in support with young men. That right there. And I think it hurts them on multiple levels. It's about the future. That's number one. But it's this other thing we're talking about, Razib, which is that you need soldiers. You need people out in the field. You need people pounding the pavement. I've got this friend who is this really charismatic guy who used to lead the cheers for the college football team. And when Obama was a thing, he was going to the battleground states and he was leading canvassers around. That guy was not working for the Harris campaign, that archetype. And if he was, I think that's a few and far between proposition. So it hurts you at the ballot box, maybe in the, I don't know, 6% of people under 30 who are male. But it has these knock-on effects where it's also that they're not you win with your soldiers. It's like having an army. So it's the thing you talked about, but it's also the guys going out there. I think guys have been important for winning elections on the ground level, and they're not getting it because they've become unpopular with this demographic. And that's also hurting them in the culture because they're also running a lot of the culture of what's popular on YouTube and everything else. And it's become enough of a problem that the New York Times is talking about it, but I don't think they talk about it enough. I think that they're
Yeah.
ideologically uncomfortable with even acknowledging they need these people. And that's one of the main problems they have downstream of them wanting to diversify is the resentment that they've dredged up in the demographics that they didn't want and how those people have now joined the other team and are helping the other team gleefully.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of politics, I think one of the problems that the Harris campaign had is, they said all the right things, but no one believed that they actually believed them. In terms
Yeah.
of like trying to talk to the center, no one believed that. And even when the mask comes up, so for example, like and like people like Matt Iglesias, centrist liberals, Noah Smith have like called this out, but it's like Democratic, like, operatives and like pundits, they just need to stop talking about white dudes with sneers. They just need to stop it,
Yeah.
because it's
Hey,
like you would never talk about another demographic like that. You just like talk down to people, insult them because they're white dudes, because you could do it to white dudes. And you know what? After a while, the white dudes are like, fuck you, just
well, I think they
oh,
assumed it would never happen because it sort of didn't. I mean, I think that when progressives were in charge of Twitter, it just felt like they would be in charge of the culture in perpetuity and they would be in charge of the norms. And they didn't really see a revolt or a backlash to this sort of talk, especially with white women. I mean, white women, they became the villains of 2020, the Karens and, you know, the Central Park woman. And it became this meme of how, like, some of the stuff said about white women in that era at respectable quote unquote publications, just utterly insane in how hateful and bigoted the framing was. And I don't think the response from white women writ large was to race into the arms of the Republican Party. I think demographics can be negged. That's a take I have. You can, in the right circumstances, you can neg a demographic. People wondered how is it that Trump has said these things about Hispanics and Mexicans, and he just gains more support. It's just, look, there are a variety of reasons, but maybe sometimes, saying bad things about a group doesn't result in the group fleeing. But once
Yeah.
Elon bought Twitter and really amplified this rhetoric in a negative light, I think that's when you started to see the preference cascade happen, and you started to see
Yeah.
people go, you're gonna talk this way about me? Well, fuck you then. I'm joining the other team.
Well,
I think it really
so you said
accelerated 2022.
so you brought up Timur Karan's idea of preference cascade. So basically, that's just when, everyone privately believes something, but they're too cowardly to say anything until, there's like some people like Elon who kind of like push the landscape. So it's just tilted enough where some people start to like come out of the closet, and then other people see them, and there's a positive feedback loop, and all of a sudden it's a crack, and like everyone's like, so like Saudi Arabia actually had a preference cascade driven by the is it MBS, who's de facto ruler. I think his dad is the official ruler. But what happened was in Saudi Arabia, women couldn't drive and all this other stuff. And when they surveyed uh, guys, because like they're kind of like determining this, it turned out that most of the men in Saudi Arabia were okay with women driving, but they thought the other men were not okay with women driving.
It's that dynamic,
Yeah,
man.
because they were very, very like, because like people were like, social scientists were a little confused as to how quickly Saudi Arabia liberalized so much, and it turned out that the individual Saudis were actually considerably more liberal, but since the culture imposed this, oh, we're Saudi, we're conservative, they kept it to themselves. And then when MBS like just knocked it down and said, hey, it's okay, he gave permission, everyone was like, okay, well, I'm okay with it. And the other guy's like, I'm okay with it. Well, wait, are we all okay with it? Like, I guess, so that's a preference cascade. So I think, we are definitely seeing a preference cascade. I think you're right about like Elon and other things, and it's we're living in an interesting times. I always like to say that you are a sports writer and cultural commentator, and I think we can see here like how they're tied together. I want to like call back to the sports aspect, like stuff like BLM and like taking a knee and all these things. They actually did start in the mid-teens, like trying to penetrate popular culture through certain
Oh
sports
yeah.
figures like Colin Kaepernick and whatnot.
Well,
It's
and
mass it's mass society. A lot of people watch sports.
yeah, sports are powerful mimetic models, or at least people think they are. And the assumed neutrality of sports as this watering hole the whole culture comes to, the Super Bowl, for instance, that neutrality makes it an especially important keep for ideologies and ideologues. If you can take the place that reads as normal and have that reflect your values, then you've won in essence, and your values now read as normal. That's why the activists really cared about pressuring celebrities and also athletes during this time. Platformism is what I call it. There's all this pressure. Use your platform. You're not using your platform. You've got to use your platform. These athletes are always being guilted about how they need to use their platform, and the media especially, because we know there's no wall between activist and ideologue and professional media person. I mean, I saw it happen. The NBA moved its All-Star game, its 2017 All-Star game, out of Charlotte because of the bathroom bill. Now, I don't know everything about that bathroom bill, but I recall Steph Curry, because he's from Charlotte, and I was in the locker room after the games, he just kept getting asked about it by these media people that he needed to take a stand on this. You need to take a stand on this. Are you going to take a stand? He kept hemming and hawing. He kept avoiding. And I think eventually he joined the more progressive side of it, even though he was a fairly religious Christian. And don't quote me on it. I can't remember. But the main point I'm making is this. It's that he didn't want to be talking about this, but other forces who really cared about him being a mimetic model of what they wanted to do were pressuring him. And that is something that we especially saw on the progressive side before Elon Twitter. When the progressives ran Twitter, the athletes were getting a whole lot of pressure to mirror certain ideologies, and now they've forgotten a lot about it. And people who are going to devote their whole lives to anti-racist practices and reforming the police, just they never talked about it again. And now we're in a new era
Yeah.
with new fixations.
Yeah, I do. Just last thing I want to say on that is like, I do commend people who just like do not offer their opinion on things they don't know anything about or haven't thought about. My friend Chris Williamson, prominent podcaster, that's like a big, people have asked him like, why haven't you commented on this big thing that's happening? And he's just like, because I don't know anything about it beyond you, so I'm not going to say anything. Uh, just like a weird example recently, I follow this fantasy podcaster named Daniel Green, mostly because like Brandon Sanderson stuff. This is like nerd virgin stuff. We need to get into details, but he's super woke. He's bisexual, but like I like his like commentary on Sanderson, whatever. And he's not like woke. He's just like normally woke for like a 25-year-old fantasy guy. Okay, well, I didn't know what was happening, but apparently, he was accused of rape. I think I can say that word. Allegedly, allegedly raping a
Okay.
woman. And then within like 3 days, all of his friends, including his best friend on YouTube who did like dozens of shows with him or something, Murphy Napier. I'm just like gonna name her because like I'm just like it's like disgusting the
Yeah.
behavior. Denounced him without listening to what he had to say, and it turned out that he had the receipts. It was
When
clearly a
when
mentally.
when when was when was
This
this,
has all
by the way?
happened
What
in the
year?
last like week and a half.
Oh my
On YouTube,
god. Like
BookTube, on BookTube.
s some places I call it Earth 2, where Kamala wins the election and Elon never bought Twitter. The
Yeah,
WNBA call it Earth
yeah,
2, where this sort of cancellation,
yeah.
progressive, like, this sort of thing. This is still going on. Oh my
BookTube.
god,
Yeah,
okay.
but yeah, BookTube is very progressive, and so they all of his friends and non-friends and everybody was asked about it, and so they had to say something, and he was taking a few days to formulate a response because he has been accused on a public platform of raping someone, and he was losing sponsors, he's losing subscribers, and his best friend on YouTube denounces him. Uh, Without even getting his
Ac
side, like, she texted him, he didn't
Oh,
respond in time, so she just recorded within a day, I think, and anyway, it turned out he had the receipts. Like, he had, like, an hour-long video where he showed, like, all the videos with, like, full context. His fiancée came on to explain that he had an affair, that there was no rape, that there's, like, plenty of evidence that there wasn't, all this stuff. I mean, and then the woman kind of recanted. My whole point is, how are you ever going to be friends with these people anymore?
it's the darkness of the human spirit that maybe that's not the right phrase. I can't imagine doing that. I can't imagine doing that. Maybe if I lived in a place that was run by the literal Stasi and my family was in danger, but they just do this voluntarily just for little social media brownie
Yeah,
points.
for clicks and virtue signaling. To be fair, Murphy Napier was very emotional. She as I don't know her background, but she alluded to like a history of sexual assault. I get that. The problem is you did dozens of videos with this person, your friends, you've like stayed at their place, like you know them, and
Yeah.
some
I
woman makes an accusation and you do this, what are you thinking? You need to reconsider your values. This is why we need a vibe shift. I really hope that the woke right or whatever, I don't like to use that word, so I'm not going to use the word. Now that we quote we are in power, like the non-woke side, there has been a little bit of like read the room. I don't like that either, you know?
No.
I don't like that either, so I'm going to piss people off. I don't care. I don't care.
Well, I hope we just establish more of a norm of waiting for evidence. I will make one point before we wrap up, by the way, on this whole shift and the male shift in preference and the epilogue to the sports as this ideological project during the pre-Elon Twitter. Nobody made this point. I think I might have been the only one who made this point in the run up to the election. There was no athlete in the major American sports, male athlete, who endorsed Kamala Harris, who was in their 20s. Like, no, and that's, you can say that's, I'm like really slicing the pear thin there, but no, the 20s, that's in your prime. That's, I'm talking the Zoomers. None of these guys endorsed Kamala Harris for president. And a few of them I could name endorsed Trump. That to me, I mean, I knew Trump was going to win just because of the early voting data, but that to me was just a sign of, this is this other thing where the elder millennials, man, they're a better Democratic constituency. They came up when Obama came up and were inspired by him. So when you saw pro athletes endorsing Kamala, it was Steph Curry, geriatric millennial, LeBron James, geriatric millennial. Zoomers not so much. And there's this fascinating clip, I think it's called Court of Gold, about the US men's Olympic basketball team. It's very well produced. It's on Netflix, of them winning the gold medal. And the young star, Anthony Edwards, is talking himself up to Obama. And you can just tell that Anthony Edwards does not care who this guy is. I'm not saying he doesn't like him. I'm not saying that Anthony Edwards is MAGA, but it's just this young player. You can see the reverence. LeBron is in the room at that time, and Obama is going, this guy says he's the truth. And Edwards is just bragging about it, and he's correcting Obama and chastising Obama for not knowing how good he is, just talking at him. That's this other aspect where the recent vibe shift, whatever we've gone through, the younger athletes, I think the younger men just have fewer reasons to
Well,
attach themselves to the Democratic
the
brand.
youth, the youth often rebel, and the new orthodoxy that you elder millennials imposed on them, they didn't like it, for a
Yeah.
variety of reasons,
Yeah.
especially the men, and they're just like, just like, no, they're not going to respect you. Like they had to live through all that crap. They had to like put like, what did they put like some red thing or something on their Instagram? Everyone had to do it. Like all of these things that they had to do,
Well,
like they're over it.
Anthony Edwards got in trouble on Instagram because he was IG living, I think, outside of a gay club, and some gay dudes were just being gay. They weren't doing anything particularly amorous, and he was going, "Man, what'd the world come to?" And he used the Q word. And by the way, I'm going to sound very woke. I don't support what Anthony Edwards did. I don't think you should just IG live random gay guys and express your disgust over it. Maybe that makes me a
What
big
what
old
what if yeah
libtard.
yeah no, what if like what if some guy in a MAGA hat like saw an interracial couple was like,
Yeah.
what the hell is happening in this
Yeah.
country right now?
Yeah.
God made the different God made the different races. You're destroying God's work. I don't know.
Was the world coming to? What's it coming to? And people would ask me, "Oh, are the like younger players are more progressive, right? And they're like more pro gay." And I'm go, look, that's what Anthony Edwards did, and no NBA players, as far as I know, said boo about it. The only NBA player who said anything about it, as far as I could see, was a player who expressed disgust over Edwards getting fined $40,000 for it. So it gives you a little bit of an understanding of how we haven't reached this point of history where we just accelerate towards more and more progressivism. History is more complicated and it's not linear. Just seeing that through the prism of a guard on the Minnesota Timberwolves.
Well, someday we have to go to sleep. We're recording late, actually, so just like breaking the fourth wall
Yeah.
here. We've been
Yeah.
talking for a while. This is actually not a very long conversation for us. It's just that we're recording it for people for their amusement and entertainment. Just like no homo, but like we could talk for
Ah,
6 hours. We have,
enjoy it.
we have. So
We're voluble individuals. I'm
yeah,
verbose, I like to talk. It's how I organize my thoughts.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I get that adrenaline for you, the Razib listener. I feel like I gotta bring it all because you're a smart cohort, you people. So, I'm just trying to impress. That's all it is.
Well, I mean, I'm sure you did. I'm not gonna be in SF actually for a little while. Like, there's a lot of South by Southwest stuff, so we gotta sync up at some point about when you're gonna come visit. I can show
Mhm.
you my crew here in Austin, and there's a lot of people. Speaking of listeners, there's a lot of people. Just among the young male cohort, the athletic sports type people that actually like are the type of guys that are like, "Oh, wow, Ethan Strauss," So, I
Oh,
gotta like,
la-di-da.
I gotta, sh- I gotta show you off, and that I'm kind of cool too to my younger
Oh,
friends, who follow your stuff. So yeah, House of Strauss. That's mostly where they can find you. I mean, I think you're on Twitter a little bit, but not really.
not really.
A lot of good content. Like your podcast frequency is like out of control, off the hook or off the chain, as you used to say 20 years ago. And like you have some great essays and stuff. I'm just gonna say though, like Ethan, like I think the next couple of years, diversify your brand, man. You got a lot of thoughts, you got a lot of things, and just like put that out
Mhm.
there, and I think you're gonna be surprised as to
I've
like how
got
people respond.
I've got certain opportunities. I'm at a
Yeah,
I've got a little bit of a road fork in front of me, and I'll figure it out. I'll figure it out without
you
going
always
too
do.
crazy. Well, you know what it's like. It's strange when you're your own business. You worry about the narcissism potential there.
Yeah,
Your
yeah. You
Substack
create
is
your own.
you.
Yeah, you create your own roadmap. It's not like someone else's plan or vision.
I just worry about going crazy. That's my main worry. I just want to stay sane. I worry if I expand too much, then it will all fall
I go.
apart.
That's fair. That's fair. I go crazy though, like on my Substack, as you know. So
Well,
there's
no,
different
I
ways.
mean, we have that problem. This is the other thing that the last stereotype we'll leave you with is that we've noticed that Jewish males sometimes go crazy. They sometimes have manic episodes, and I'm just trying to avoid this. I'm just trying to do as much as I can control. But Razib, I think that you're probably right. I do need to expand. I do need to lean into the vibe shift, and I thank you for having me on and giving me a platform to use your
That's what they said.
platform to
I
rescue the
platformed
country.
you.
Thanks for
All right, man.
platforming me.
Yeah, it was great
See you,
talking to you. Hope the people enjoyed it.
man. Thanks, man.
This podcast for kids